One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Dr. Eric Wood. Dr. Wood is the Deputy Athletics Director for Competitive Excellence at University of Central Florida. Greetings, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ty.
Eric, I've known you for a long time. You've been in the industry for 20 years. I've probably known you for 10 or 15 of those years, right?
Yeah,
of course,
that's
you know
right.
everybody in everybody in college athletics. You started off at Clemson as a GA. You went to NCAA as an intern. Time in New Haven, Wake Forest, the ACC office, Arkansas. Now you find yourself at University of Central Florida, UCF, which is doing some wonderful things. But when you talk about athletics departments, right, you talk about how they're ran. And many in college athletics would say that an athletics department is broken down into two major operations, right? There's revenue generation and then the student athlete experience, or, and this is probably super simplified, but external and internal operations. And then looking at your role, Deputy AD for Competitive Excellence. In my mind, I think that's akin to running the internal side of UCF athletics. Would that be correct?
Yeah, it's a rather I work for one of the most progressive ADs in the country, so there's never going to be or rarely will there be traditional things that he does, and that goes all the way to the titles that we have. But you're right. I mean, in a simplified world, yes, internal, external side of the house. I would say I primarily live on the internal side of the house, and as Danny and I were talking about my role here. The first thing was to operate towards my strengths, which, as you mentioned, at those different spots, I started off in the compliance world, moved to student athlete development, and then academics, and then started to pick up some sport administration, and then end up in this role here with the competitive excellence. So it's a new title. I imagine you'll see a few more coming out there soon. But Ty, essentially competitive excellence is anything that helps our coaches and student athletes win. And so that could be related to how we resource them, how we budget. It could be something related to the event operations for their respective sports. It could be a facilities issue. It could be our nutrition center operations. It could be things more in my wheelhouse, which are the advising and counseling and housing and financial aid issues. So essentially, if you ask Danny White what competitive excellence means or meant to him, I'm the GM. I work with other sport administrators and department heads, and they may be on the external side. That's what I love about this role, is that I'm not, while primarily I live on the internal side, if it impacts our coaches or our student athletes winning in the classroom or on the playing field, then I'm involved in it.
Yeah, and that you're thinking about how you described that. You have your hands in a multitude of things, right? You say Danny calls you the general manager there. One thing I learned when I first started involving myself in college athletics, when I was in football coaching, but then started involving myself in college athletics. One thing I always heard about working in college athletics, you're pigeonholed or you're working in silos, and then you work your way to the top. And what it sounds like you've done over your career is kind of had your hands in a little bit of everything, to where you find yourself now in this competitive excellence position where Danny considers you a general manager. But in terms of leadership, the role you're in as deputy, you're making suggestions and not making final decisions. I'd like to know, what do you advise the AD down there at UCF? What do you advise him on, like the critical decisions he needs to make when he turns to you? What kind of information are you giving him so he can make the best possible decision?
Yeah, so let me address the first part of that question, which was the different areas that allowed me to gain experience. I am a firm believer in running towards something and not from something, and so each of those moves really involved, as best I could, to increase my responsibilities or to diversify the portfolio, so to speak. Right, so even in the move from Arkansas to here, I was able to pick up our sports performance area, which is strength and conditioning, what most people refer to as strength and conditioning, but a different sport. I had golf while I was at Arkansas, and now I'm the co-administrator for football primary administrator for men's basketball and women's tennis. So those are just all different perspectives and different cultures, sport cultures and department cultures. And so, yes, I'm a firm believer, and I advise, when I'm mentoring others, it's just to run towards something, right? And don't just run from the previous job. But in advising our AD, my main goal is to free him up. I try to approach this as keeping the pulse, trying to serve as the expert for him, giving him all sides of the picture when it relates to any of these issues that impacts our coaches or our student athletes winning. And again, that's not a competitive notion. That's not just a contest as it relates to sport contest. That's just winning and graduating and being the best they could be for our coaches, having what they need to win. But the way I advise him is, number one, I've got to keep the pulse. I'm rarely at my desk, Ty, and that's not because I'm looking for busy work, but I find that I got to do a lot of these things in person. So that's whether I'm getting out to a practice, going to one of our departments, sitting in on the external meeting, just so I have a pulse there of what's happening and how that's going to impact our coaches. So yeah, number one, I'm keeping the pulse. Number two, I would say not just for our teams, but the administrative culture as well. From an HR perspective, we just had John Gordon here last week, and he talked about being relentless about your culture. Well, to be relentless about your culture, you got to know what everybody at all levels, what they're thinking, and not you can't please everyone, but I want to be that person that gives him an idea of what people are thinking and feeling in our unit, right? Because what we learn is that people leave people, right? They don't leave jobs, they leave people. So if people leave here, we want them to move forward because it's just an opportunity we can't provide at this time, or there's just a growth opportunity there, or it gets them closer to family. And so I want to be that person for him as well. So that's a little bit of it.
I'd imagine, Eric, there are probably some times when he has to make challenging decisions, right? Talk to me about that aspect of the job.
If I'm being really transparent, the growth that I experienced from even just say the last job, so from the University of Arkansas to here, is, and just in my thinking and my problem-solving approach, the growth I've experienced in advising the AD is, I used to be able to just throw out a suggestion and dump it on his desk and walk away and really not live with it, and here the best thing I can do for Danny is to think through the process and address it as if I were the AD. Danny, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I would do. Here are the pros and cons of this thing. And you end up living in the gray. I know people don't like to hear that, and that doesn't mean you're skirting rules or anything like that, but your reputation, you're weighing the decision. Every decision you make sets a precedent within your group, within your department, and within the community. And so the best thing I can do for Danny is to thoroughly think it through and not dump it on his desk. And so I try to address all of the critical issues and say, Danny, if I were in your chair, and he has more information than I do sometimes, right? That's what we all have to understand is when the AD goes in a different direction, he may have information or she may have information that you don't have. That's the hard part. But the best thing I can do for Danny is to not dump it and just go, here you go, boss, and move on. But to really try to approach that decision and give him a perspective on how campus may receive that, on how our community may receive that, how the coach or the student athletes may receive whatever the issue is before he makes a decision. But the growth I've experienced just from one job to another is in how I approach that and having a problem-solving mentality.
Now, Eric, you mentioned that, of course, there at Central Florida with Danny, that you guys are kind of progressive in your thinking, right? Thinking out the box, titles, competitive excellence. I wonder if that goes into how you operate, right? Do you, and I know you guys have a 2 or 3 deputy positions, somebody probably over revenue generation and over, different things there. Do you guys lean on each other for different areas of your own individual departments?
Sure. Yeah. So we just started with this leadership structure. Now our deputy ADs, the 3 of us, so Mark Wright being over the development area, which is what we call championship resources. Scott Carr is over brand advancement, which is all of our external areas, traditionally speaking. And so the 3 of us get together and we meet once a week with the AD, and that's in addition to our executive staff meetings and our senior staff meetings. One of the best things that's happened though is I have the opportunity to lead our internal leadership group. And Scott Carr joining that meeting, because he's now a sport administrator, he brings the external piece and flavor to our meeting, just as a space and a world that he lives in. And then I make it a point, as I previously mentioned, to get to the external meeting, just to, maybe sometimes I can chime in there on what the coaches are thinking, or student athletes are thinking, or just an internal perspective there. So it has to be that we are innovative here and that we rely on each other's expertise. And when you've got a group of people that don't care about who gets the credit, you have the explosion of our brand and our excellence here that we've seen over the last couple of years under Danny's leadership.
Right. I'd imagine that's an asset for all three of you guys, right? I mean, somebody who's in development has probably spent a long time in development. And then somebody who's in marketing and ticketing and branding and social media and digital and revenue generation on that side of the house, their careers probably have been in that. Your career has been internal. And when you guys get together, I'd imagine there's a lot of exchange of ideas and information and learning about what the other person does. I mean, everybody has their career, has their friends that are all over the industry, but in a unique setup like you guys have, there's probably assets to everybody's career when you talk about running an athletics department.
Absolutely. I think the worst thing you can do is get in that meeting, go through your to-do list of things you need Danny to hear or weigh in on, right, as the AD, and then tune out one of the other two guys because it doesn't relate to you really. Like, that's the worst thing you can do. And so, while I want to get some things answered that I need Danny's final decision on or input, as soon as I finish my part speaking, I'm picking up my pen and I'm ready to write, because Scott is going to bring a perspective from TV contracts and radio, coaches shows and fan experience and our marketing and Mark and his 20 plus years of experience from a fundraising perspective, and how you deal with how you work with our donors and cultivate the fan base. I mean, you'd be crazy not to take notes. And so sometimes we're in there for an hour, sometimes we're in there for an hour and a half. But after my part's done, I'm even more engaged because it's an area that I didn't grow up in, so to speak. So yes, but you could still have that and everybody get really territorial. And so Danny brought us all together, right, when he started this new structure and just said, we're all in this all together. And so we've got to lean on each other and not be territorial so that we can all, impact our student athletes and our coaches here.
I want to ask you a couple questions here about leadership before we wrap. The inflection point in your career was probably when you started leading people. No matter what area of athletics or anywhere in the professional world, industry, when you start leading people, that's a major inflection point, because now you're almost you have like responsibility of other people's work, which tie into the whole organization. You're overseeing a very visible sport in men's basketball. You mentioned you're helping out to oversee. You have oversight of football, helping out with oversight of football, men's and women's tennis, sports performance. You mentioned that senior leadership staff, people who are have oversight over other things, and a number of other responsibilities there at UCF. When you talk about leadership, what have you found in the past, and what do you find now to be the most effective when you're providing guidance to those who are under your supervision?
The first thing, the most important thing is, and I'd have to go back and get this right, but it was the concept that was most important to me. So it's either Stephen Covey or Sean Covey, but
that family, right?
that family. He referenced everything happens at the speed of trust. And that has become the most evident part of leadership. I mean, from the time that when I started at Arkansas with a 4-person staff to a 30-person staff to, here essentially working with all of our, internal units for sure, and then others as our coaches and student athletes, have needs. But everything happens at the speed of trust. That one was the most powerful. I didn't know how to articulate it back then until I read that. But I would say that was the most important deal. And so if I'm dealing with our academic advisors, it applies with your head coach or whoever your liaison is for that sport. If it's a strength coach, if it's the compliance staff, right? Everything happens at the speed of trust. And so that's something. If it's with Danny, the more he trusts me, the more he will allow me to make those decisions and trust me to make the decisions and not micromanage what I'm doing, and therefore I don't have to micromanage what others are doing. And so, number one, I would say the relationships and building trust. I would say number two is, again, this has been my biggest growth point, but it's being innovative within the rules, solving problems, particularly for those of us that have been on the internal side, Tai, right? When you don't have the numbers to show of revenue that you've generated or funds that you've raised, right? The one way for you to stand out is to be a problem solver within the rules, solve the problems for, and remove the barriers for your team to do their work. So I would say that's the one that I've been latching onto, the last couple of years in this role. Finally, I would say to compete. Competition's a personal value of mine. That doesn't always mean with others. Sometimes it means with myself, to just be a better version of myself each year and with each opportunity and each promotion and increase in responsibilities, but also the expectations for the people that are directors, within my portfolio of responsibilities is be the best, man. Like compete with records we've set in previous years, compete with our conference, compete nationally with the student athlete in mind. I firmly believe that another cliche here, but it just pops into mind, but I believe that everything that gets measured improves, right? I mean, and so if you're paying attention to it and you're benchmarking it, you're bound to improve and to be, more familiar with it and to get better at it. And so I would say, if there's anything I can say about the leadership in my areas, they fall under one of those three: build trust, be innovative, and compete.
Right. Build trust, be innovative in solving problems, and compete. Those are very important, especially if you're competitive at building trust and solving problems. Now you got a monster on your hands, right? Well, Eric, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining me. I've known you for this long. I've seen the work you've done. I've seen the leadership that you exude when you're around people and when you're in your areas and doing what you're supposed to do. I'm sure Danny and the folks at UCF consider you a great asset there on campus. I really appreciate you joining us on One Question.
Tai, it's a pleasure to be on with you. Thanks for having me, man. We need to do it again.
That was Dr. Eric Wood. He's the Deputy Athletics Director for Competitive Excellence at University of Central Florida. And of course, this is Tai Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.